the summer of 1980, a comedy named Caddyshack quietly hit theaters. When the first reels rolled, film critics lined up to deliver the most ruthless beatdowns imaginable. They called the movie an unorganized mess, a sloppy disaster with no clear plot, and a massive waste of studio money. But history always has its own sense of humor. Ignoring every academic critique, mainstream audiences went absolutely crazy for it. They flocked to theaters time and time again, turning a critically trashed project into a box office phenomenon, and ultimately launching it into the stratosphere as one of the greatest, most iconic sports comedies of all time. Yet, the on-screen madness is only the tip of the iceberg. Did you know that to create this masterpiece, the crew turned the movie set into a giant, drug-fueled nightclub? Or that the explosion at the end of the film was so massive, it nearly triggered an airplane crash alert from air traffic control? Or that behind the roaring laughter lies a tragedy that destroyed the life of a beautiful young actress? Today, let's step inside the Bushwood Country Club to peel back the curtain on the 20 most bizarre, dark, and untold behind-the-scenes facts about the making of Caddyshack. If you think you know everything about this movie, well, brace yourself to have your mind blown. Number 1. The bitter hatred between the two leading stars. There's an unspoken rule in Hollywood. Just because you share the screen doesn't mean you're friends. And the relationship between the film's two biggest superstars, Chevy Chase as Ty Webb and Bill Murray as Carl Spackler, was a literal ticking time bomb on set. This bitter feud didn't start on Caddyshack. The seeds were planted back in their days on the legendary live sketch show Saturday Night Live. When Chevy Chase left SNL in a blaze of glory to pursue a movie career, Bill Murray was the guy brought in to replace him. When Chase returned to SNL as a guest host, their massive egos and fierce rivalry exploded. It didn't just stop at snarky insults, it devolved into a bloody, bare-knuckle fistfight right inside actor John Belushi's dressing room. Years later, when both were cast in Caddyshack, the entire crew held their breath in terror. The producers deliberately scheduled the shoots so the two would never have to cross paths. However, as production neared its end, studio executives suddenly realized a fatal flaw. Their two biggest, most ticket-selling stars didn't share a single scene together. In a state of sheer panic, director Harold Ramis pulled the two men aside during lunch and hastily drafted a short scene in a maintenance shed. Despite the simmering tension and a feud that had never truly cooled, Chase and Murray stepped onto the set, put their egos aside, and riffed off each other with pure brilliance. That classic sequence was nailed in just a few takes, proving that no matter how much they hated each other, they were absolute comedic geniuses. Number 2. Absurd pranks ripped straight from real life. One of the reasons Caddyshack holds such a bizarre charm despite its disjointed script is that it's deeply rooted in reality. The movie wasn't dreamed up in an air-conditioned Hollywood boardroom. It was highly autobiographical, penned by writer Brian Doyle Murray, Bill Murray's real-life older brother. During their teenage years in Illinois, Brian and Bill Murray actually worked as caddies at the Indian Hill Club. Every satirical jab at upper-class vanity, every eccentric character, from the conservative judge to the senile old couple who couldn't hit a ball, was copy-pasted directly from the Murray brothers' memories. But the most iconic real-life element has to be the pool scene. In the film, the entire pool erupts into screaming chaos as people flee, thinking someone left human waste in the water, only to discover it was just a floating brown Baby Ruth candy bar. This gross-out gag wasn't a work of fiction. It was an actual wicked prank the Murray brothers pulled in high school to terrify the local rich kids. Even the movie's most unfortunate accident, when Judge Smales accidentally drives a golf ball straight into a man's groin, is a 100% true story. Director Harold Ramis had caused that exact same accident in real life, and he decided to use his own humiliation in the film for a cheap laugh. Number 3. A movie set or a drug-fueled nightclub. To understand the vibe on the Caddyshack set, you have to understand the landscape of Hollywood in 1979. It was the golden age of debauchery, where the line between working and partying was practically erased. The production of this film went down in American cinematic history not for its high art, but because it holds the infamous reputation of being one of the most toxic and drug-fueled movie sets to ever exist. Director Harold Ramis and producer Douglas Kenney The guys who had just created the mega-hit Animal House accidentally established a completely undisciplined work culture. Cocaine wasn't just a whispered secret, it was out in the open, treated by insiders as the primary fuel, keeping the cast and crew awake for weeks on end. When the sun went down, the hotels housing the crew morphed into wild nightclubs. All-night benders, hard liquor, and narcotics fueled erratic, uncontrollable behavior on set the very next morning. For the comedians, this chaos might have been the catalyst for their craziest improvisations. But for the executives at Orion Pictures back in Los Angeles, it was an ongoing nightmare. They dealt with constant reports of actors showing up late, forgetting lines, and a crew operating in a state of biological exhaustion. The production was like a runaway roller coaster with no brakes, and the fact that they managed to wrap filming without anyone ending up in the hospital was a genuine miracle. Number 4. Shooting in the South but struggling to hide. Palm trees. Script-wise, the story of Caddyshack takes place in a peaceful Midwestern suburb, a setting meant to represent classic conservative America. Director Harold Ramis desperately wanted to shoot in his home state of Illinois to preserve the story's soul. But production realities threw a bucket of cold water on that plan. The movie was greenlit in the fall, a time when Midwestern weather turns freezing and trees start shedding their leaves, which completely ruined the illusion of a vibrant summer. To save money and race against the clock, the crew had to pack up their gear, fly down to the warm South, and choose the Rolling Hills Country Club in Davie, Florida, as their primary location. The only reason they picked this specific golf course was because it had the fewest tropical palm trees in the area. However, tricking the audience's eyes was no easy feat. The camera crew had to calculate agonizingly tight angles, chop down vegetation, or erect tarps to hide any palm trees or tropical plants from creeping into the frame, all to maintain the illusion that they were in the Midwest. Ironically, this escape from the weather invited another disaster. Right in the early weeks of filming, Hurricane David slammed directly into Florida, wiping out their tents, destroying equipment, and halting production, which caused the budget to unexpectedly balloon. Number 5. The unexpected rise of a comedy star. The original Caddyshack script focused entirely on Danny Noonan and the teenage golf caddies. It was framed as an insightful coming-of-age story. However, Orion Pictures wasn't about to throw millions of dollars at a project starring a bunch of nameless teenagers. They issued a ruthless ultimatum: reel in America's most notorious comedy stars, or the project gets permanently iced. The star hunt began. Chevy Chase was the first to sign on. Next, the producers targeted legendary stand-up comic Don Rickles for the loud-mouthed nouveau riche character, Al Chervik. But due to contract snags, Rickles couldn't do it. At that dead-end moment, they pivoted to Rodney Dangerfield. At the time, Dangerfield was a god on the stand-up comedy circuit, but he was a total rookie when it came to movies. Caddyshack was his very first major film role. Having never acted in a movie, Dangerfield brought sheer terror with him to the set. During the early days, he was constantly sweating bullets and complaining to the director that he was bombing. The reason? When he did stand up, the audience clapped and roared with laughter. But on a movie set, when the cameras roll, every single crew member has to remain dead silent. That silence made Dangerfield think his jokes were completely flatlining. It took a lot of time for director Ramis to reassure him that everyone was literally biting their lips to keep from laughing out loud, and that he was building a cinematic icon. Number 6. The earth-shattering golf course explosion. The movie closes with an iconic sequence. Carl Spackler, in a desperate bid to annihilate the gopher, detonates massive chunks of plastic explosive rigged across the golf course, blowing the entire fairway sky high. Do you think those were miniature practical effects? Nope, those were real bombs, packed with real explosives, shot at a 1.1 scale. The special effects team used such a colossal amount of explosives that it far exceeded their initial calculations. When the bombs went off, they created a massive pillar of fire and a mushroom cloud towering dozens of meters into the air. The blast was so horrifying that a commercial pilot preparing to land at the nearby Fort Lauderdale International Airport saw the smoke column and panicked. His intuition told him something catastrophic had just happened. The pilot immediately grabbed his radio and frantically called air traffic control to report that a large aircraft had potentially just crashed and exploded on the ground. And it doesn't stop there. Behind this epic spectacle was a blatant deception. The production crew actually never asked for permission, nor did they inform the owners of the Rolling Hills Club that they were going to blow up their turf. The effects team had to sneakily build fake dirt mounds as camouflage, waiting for the exact moment the golf course executives left the premises to hit the detonator, creating an irreversible, done deal. Number 7. The stand-in and the monologue that stole the spotlight. The character Carl Spackler, the filthy, mumbling groundskeeper obsessed with killing a gopher, is the true soul of Caddyshack. But the truth is, this character barely had any weight in the original script. Initially, this was just a tiny, non-speaking cameo, and Bill Murray was only contracted to fly to Florida and work for exactly 6 days. But a comedy genius doesn't need a script to shine. When the cameras rolled, Murray hijacked the set. Basing the character on a real-life drifter he once knew, Murray started mumbling, taunting, and doing things so bizarre that the entire crew was doubled over in laughter. His most transcendent moment in history, the monologue about an unknown underdog suddenly winning the Masters while hacking the heads off flowers with a grass whip, didn't have a single word written in the script. It was 100% improvised from a brief piece of direction from Ramis. Carl mutters to himself. Realizing he was holding a diamond, director Harold Ramis tore up the original plan. He constantly called and begged Bill Murray to fly back from New York to Florida, time and time again, to shoot new scenes. The subplot about the war between Spackler and the gopher swelled completely out of control, turning a 6-day stand-in into the central character, entirely stealing the spotlight from the main cast. Number 8. Youthful rebellion and a veteran's resentment. On screen, Judge Smales, played by veteran actor Ted Knight, is the ultimate symbol of rigid, old-school authority, constantly oozing disgust and contempt for the rowdy younger generation. If you thought his seething anger on film looked too real, it's because he was genuinely furious in real life. Ted Knight belonged to the old guard of Hollywood. Fiercely professional, memorized his lines down to the comma, went to bed early, and arrived on set exactly on time. When he walked onto the Caddyshack set, he looked like a monk thrown into the middle of a frat party. The young cast, led by Chevy Chase and Bill Murray, treated the movie set like a playground. At night, highly intoxicated, they'd routinely host reckless golf cart drag races, tearing up the club's pristine greens, pulling pranks and screaming at the top of their lungs. The next morning, they'd stumble onto set half asleep and constantly trash the script to ad-lib nonsense. That loud, undisciplined, and chaotic atmosphere utterly destroyed Ted Knight's patience. In later interviews, he bitterly admitted that it took every ounce of his energy just to tolerate their unprofessional behavior. Though it never boiled over into a physical fistfight on set, insiders felt the constant, simmering undercurrent of tension. Fortunately, Ted Knight's repressed frustration was perfectly captured by the camera, helping him deliver the greatest performance of a grumpy old judge in his entire career. Number 9. The troublesome animatronic gopher and a costly patch-up. Bill Murray's sworn enemy in the film, the dancing gopher, is one of the most iconic supporting characters of all time. But the truth behind its creation was a chronic headache for the filmmakers. When the first rough cut of the film was pieced together, studio executives watched it and delivered a grim verdict. The movie was way too disjointed. There was no connective tissue between the scenes, and they desperately needed a mascot to act as the glue to hold the story together. Director Ramis decided to inject more cash and hire special effects wizard John Dykstra, who had just won an Oscar for the visual effects in Star Wars, to build the gopher. This gopher was actually a highly complex mechanical puppet operated by a hydraulic system. The problem was, by the time this idea was greenlit, all the principal photography with the cast on the golf course had wrapped, and everyone had gone home. This meant the VFX team had to build fake dirt tunnel sets on an isolated soundstage back in Hollywood. All the shots of the gopher popping its head out of the ground, dancing or taunting, were shot entirely separately in post-production, then awkwardly spliced and sandwiched between the movie's actual frames. That's exactly why, if you look closely, this animatronic gopher is almost never in the exact same frame as Bill Murray or any other actor. Number 10. The hidden tragedy of a young actress. Behind the roaring laughter and the billion-dollar legacy of Caddyshack, a dark shadow of tragedy looms over the fate of a young actress, leaving cinema fans with a profound sense of sorrow. It is the story of Sarah Holcomb, who played Maggie O'Hooligan, the beautiful Irish girlfriend of the male lead, Danny. Sarah Holcomb walked into Hollywood with radiant beauty and undeniable raw talent. Before Caddyshack, she made a massive splash playing the mayor's 13-year-old daughter in the comedy smash Animal House. She seemed to be holding the golden ticket to join the ranks of A-list superstars in the 80s. Yet, that spotlight was extinguished swiftly and brutally by the time she turned 22. Caddyshack was the fourth and final movie in Sarah's painfully short acting career. The toxic environment of 1980s Hollywood swallowed the young girl whole. Animal House screenwriter Chris Miller once bitterly admitted that Sarah entered the entertainment industry way too young. She was thrown into movie sets flooded with drugs and the wild, unhinged partying of older stars. The temptation of narcotics quickly ravaged Sarah's fragile mental state, ultimately triggering her underlying schizophrenia. After 1980, Sarah completely vanished from Hollywood. She had to undergo extensive psychiatric treatment and battle fierce addictions. To protect herself from the media's invasive glare, she made the decision to permanently cut ties with the limelight. To this day, rumors say Sarah Holcomb is living a quiet, secluded life in rural Connecticut under an assumed name. It's a heartbreaking end, closing the career of a rising star who had graced two of America's most iconic comedies. Number 11. The Gopher's Squeak was a massive scam. The image of the bouncy, dancing gopher became the lifeblood of Caddyshack. Anyone who has seen the movie is haunted by the chattering, provocative squeaks the animal makes whenever it taunts Carl Spackler. Audiences naturally assumed the audio team just recorded some wild rodent in nature and dubbed it over. The truth is a classic Hollywood audio scam. In the wild, gophers rarely make high-pitched noises like that. To maximize the annoyance and comedic effect of this mechanical puppet, the sound engineers grabbed an audio tape of a dolphin. More specifically, it was the trademark chatter of the famous dolphin from the massive 60s TV show Flipper. The post-production team distorted the audio track, drastically sped it up, and chopped it together. As a result, the voice of an ocean creature was permanently branded onto a land-dwelling, dirt-digging rodent. Number 12. The Dalai Lama speech in Bill Murray's Genius Brain. In one scene, groundskeeper Carl Spackler leans against a wall, muttering a wild, delusional story about the time he caddied for the spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, in Tibet. He claims that instead of a cash tip, the Lama granted him total consciousness. This monologue is so absurd, so ridiculously philosophical, and so hilarious that it became one of the most quoted lines in cinematic history. The mind-blowing truth is, not a single word of that legendary speech existed on paper. When they shot the scene, director Harold Ramis just tossed Bill Murray a pitchfork and gave him one single line of direction. Just hold this and tell some crazy story about playing golf with someone famous. The camera rolled, and Bill Murray's genius brain instantly spewed out the entire Dalai Lama story on the very first take, without missing a single beat. That flash of brilliance proved exactly why Bill Murray is an unparalleled monster when it comes to improvisational comedy. Number 13. The God-tier blind putt used zero visual effects. The character Ty Webb, played by Chevy Chase, is an eccentric golf playboy who constantly spouts meaningless Zen philosophy and insists he never keeps score. In a scene meant to show off his ridiculous skills, Ty Webb stands with his back turned and casually hits a blind putt, sinking the ball flawlessly into a drinking glass sitting on the floor. Audiences at the time were absolutely convinced the crew used a jump cut or tied an invisible fishing line to the ball to yank it into the glass. But no, in real life, Chevy Chase was an incredibly formidable golfer with stellar skills. When they filmed that scene, Chase personally calculated the angle and the force and perfectly tapped the golf ball right into the glass without a single ounce of special effects interference. It only took him a couple of tries to nail that magical shot, leaving the entire crew frozen in awe before erupting into applause. Number 14. The absolute terror and the action prank on a comedy legend. Rodney Dangerfield was a god on the stand-up stage, but walking onto the Caddyshack set, He looked like a fish out of water. This was his very first feature film. On the first day of shooting, director Harold Ramis yelled, "Action!" All the cameras rolled, but Dangerfield stood there frozen like a statue, looking utterly bewildered. Ramis had to cut the scene and ask what was wrong. Dangerfield looked confused and replied, "You mean do my bit?" From that moment on, instead of yelling "action," the director was forced to scream, "Rodney, do your bit," just to get him to start acting. And it didn't end there. Dangerfield suffered a massive psychological blow due to the crew's silence. When doing stand-up, the crowd roared. But on a movie set, to ensure clean live audio, everyone has to remain totally silent. Hearing no laughter, Dangerfield thought his jokes were turning into an absolute disaster. The stress and panic caused him to sweat profusely, soaking through multiple shirts. The director had to pull him aside, constantly soothing him and swearing up and down that everyone was literally biting their lips to hold back laughter, just to give him the courage to step back out and perform. Number 15. The paralyzing fear of Lacey Underall. The character Lacey Underall, played by Cindy Morgan, is the embodiment of deadly seduction. One of her most iconic scenes is the moment she struts out in a gorgeous swimsuit, steps confidently onto a towering diving board, and executes a breathtaking dive into the pool, leaving every man in the vicinity drooling. However, behind that fiery confidence was pure backstage panic. Actress Cindy Morgan suffered from a paralyzing fear of heights and absolutely did not know how to dive. Even scarier, she was severely nearsighted. When she had to take her glasses off to shoot the scene, the world in front of her was just a blurry mess. Forced to climb up to that dizzyingly high diving board, she was practically blind and couldn't even see where the end of the board was. She had to blindly feel her way forward in absolute terror, her legs shaking so hard she was about to collapse. After filming her walking out to the edge, the director immediately yelled "cut," pulled her down while she was practically in tears, and replaced her with a professional stunt double to actually perform the dive into the water. Number 16. The leading man ruthlessly overshadowed. If you flip open the cover of any original Caddyshack script, you'll see the absolute center of the story is Danny Noonan. The movie was originally designed as a coming-of-age journey about a teenage caddy trying to win a scholarship to escape his massive working-class family. Actor Michael O'Keefe prepped incredibly hard for this dramatic psychological role. But tragedy struck when the three comedy monsters, Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, and Rodney Dangerfield, arrived on set. With their sheer brilliance and limitless improv skills, these three superstars rewrote their own scenes, extended their screen time, and generated gut-busting laughs. When the producers watched the rough cut, they realized the audience was only going to want to watch these three goofing off. As a result, inside the editing bay, Danny Noonan's touching storyline was ruthlessly butchered to make room for Murray and Chase's antics. O'Keefe had to swallow his pride and watch his dramatic teen role get pushed to the background, turning him into a reluctant spectator in the very movie where he was supposed to be the central star. Number 17. The ruined expensive flower garden. Let's circle back to Bill Murray's character, Carl Spackler. There's a scene where he's holding a grass whip, swinging it wildly while muttering to himself, pretending to be a champion making the final swing at the Masters. As he swings, he mercilessly decapitates a row of brightly colored flowers in a planter. Audiences assume those were cheap fake flowers set up by the prop department. The truth is much more brutal. That was a bed of incredibly expensive, gorgeous, and 100% real tulips and mums. The management of the Rolling Hills Golf Club had just dropped a fortune planting those flowers to beautify the landscaping near the entrance. Bill Murray, caught up in the unscripted euphoria of his character, aimed right for that real flower bed and ruthlessly chopped the heads off every single expensive flower. Even though the take was cinematic gold, the owners of the golf course were so furious they almost kicked the entire production crew off the property that very day. Number 18. From the Star Wars universe to a gopher hole. As mentioned earlier, creating the animatronic gopher devoured a massive chunk of the studio's money and effort in post-production. But there's a ridiculous truth regarding the identity of the man who built it. To salvage a disjointed script, director Harold Ramis tracked down a VFX specialist named John Dykstra. Just a few years prior, Dykstra was a literal god in Hollywood. He was the man who led the visual effects team for George Lucas's mega blockbuster Star Wars, 1977. The guy who brought the glowing lightsabers to life and engineered the epic dogfights between massive space cruisers. He even took home a prestigious Academy Award for those monumental achievements. And now, the genius mind who just won an Oscar for the Cosmos was hired to sculpt a rubber gopher, shove a hydraulic pump up its rear end, and make it dance to a Kenny Loggins track. The steep descent, or rather, the hilarious pivot, from Star Wars down to golf course tunnels is truly one of the film industry's most priceless inside jokes. Number 19. The dark shadow of tragedy and the sudden death of a genius writer. Behind the echoing laughs of Caddyshack lies a deeply dark and heartbreaking reality. Douglas Kenney, the film's producer and co-writer, who acted as the chief architect behind a string of 70s comedy mega hits, suffered under crushing psychological pressure during post-production. When newspapers dropped their first reviews absolutely trashing the film, compounded by his panic over a messy 4-hour rough cut, Kenney spiraled into deep depression and substance abuse. At a promotional press conference for the movie, he showed up highly intoxicated, swearing and screaming at reporters. Convinced his Hollywood career was completely ruined, Kenney hit a dead end. Desperate to save his best friend, actor Chevy took Kenney on a getaway to Hawaii to help him find peace. But fate knocked on the door in the most brutal way. Not long after the movie premiered and started raking in massive success, Douglas Kenney's body was found at the bottom of a 30-foot cliff on the island of Kauai. He died at the age of 33. Although police ruled it an accidental slip, his sudden departure left a scar that would never heal in the hearts of his colleagues, casting a tragic, somber note over a legendary comedy. Number 20. A 200-page script completely. Missing a gopher. To close the file on Caddyshack, let's look back at the film's greatest mascot, the dancing gopher. What if I told you that the very soul of this entire project was actually a bastard child forced into existence in the 89th minute? That's right. If you dig up the original 200-page draft script penned by Harold Ramis, Doug Kenney, and Brian Doyle Murray, you'll have to rub your eyes in disbelief. There is absolutely no trace of any gopher in it. The entire concept of a burrowing creature destroying the golf course never even crossed the writers' minds. It wasn't until the movie wrapped, the rough cut was screened, and the Orion Pictures executives' jaws dropped at how garbage the movie was, with zero focal point connecting the chaotic scenes of Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, and Rodney Dangerfield. In utter desperation, executive producer John Peters, a guy who actually started his career as a hairdresser, slammed his fist on the table and pitched a crazy idea. We need an animal to tie this whole mess together. It was from that desperate demand that the gopher was sketched out and jammed into the film during post-production using crude editing tricks. And like a cinematic miracle, that ridiculous patch-up became the iconic symbol that saved the entire movie. Caddyshack proves a bizarre Hollywood truth. Sometimes the greatest masterpieces aren't born from meticulous preparation, but are forged out of chaos, panic, and insane last-minute decisions. Out of these 20 earth-shattering facts, which detail shocked you the most? Does knowing Bill Murray destroyed a real flower bed, or that they used dolphin noises for the gopher, change the way you look at this movie? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe so we can keep unmasking the most terrifying secrets of legendary films in the next video. See you next time.